Thomas had been a postman in the small port town of Silver Haven for 12 years. He knew every street, every doorstep, and every secret that the letters carried. The town was quiet, with gray stone houses and a harbor that smelled of salt and old wood. Most days, Thomas enjoyed the silence of his route, but one thing had begun to trouble him deeply. Every Tuesday, without fail, a letter without a return address arrived at the local sorting office. The envelope was always plain white, handwritten with neat cursive, and addressed to the old Harrington house on Cliff Lane. That house had been abandoned for nearly a decade, ever since Anna Harrington had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The police called her a probable runaway, but the townspeople whispered otherwise. Thomas never paid much attention to gossip, but the letters bothered him. Week after week, month after month, they kept coming, and no one ever claimed them. He asked his supervisor once about the letters. The supervisor shrugged and said to deliver them as addressed, so Thomas did. He would walk up the cracked pathway to the Harrington house, slide the envelope through the broken mail slot, and hear it land on the dusty floor inside. He never looked through the windows, never tried the door. It was not his job to be curious. But curiosity, once planted, grows like weeds in an abandoned garden. After 2 years of delivering those letters, Thomas could no longer ignore the question that gnawed at him: who was sending them, and why? One rainy Tuesday in November, the letter arrived as expected, but this time, the envelope felt slightly thicker. Thomas held it in his hands for a long moment. The rain tapped on his raincoat, and the wind carried the smell of the sea. He looked up at the gray sky, then down at the envelope. Anna Harrington had been a young woman with long dark hair and a quiet smile. He remembered seeing her once at the local market. Years before she vanished, she had bought apples and bread and thanked the vendor politely. That was all. Now she was just a memory, a ghost haunting a derelict house. Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He tore open the envelope. Inside, he found not a letter but a photograph and a small piece of paper. The photograph was recent, taken in what looked like a basement room with a single bare light bulb. A woman sat on a wooden chair, her face thin but recognizable. It was Anna Harrington. She looked older, tired, but very much alive. Her eyes stared directly at the camera, and in her hand she held a handwritten sign that read, "I am still here, Jeffrey Lies." The small piece of paper had no signature, only a date written in the same neat cursive: the day after tomorrow. Thomas felt his blood turn cold. He knew who Jeffrey was. Jeffrey Miller lived in the house next to the Harrington property, a retired fisherman with a quiet manner and a friendly way for everyone. He had been Anna's neighbor for years, and after she disappeared, he had stayed on. He never spoke of her. No one thought much of it. Thomas folded the photograph and the note and put them in his jacket pocket. He looked at the abandoned house, then at Jeffrey's house, which stood just 30 feet away. Smoke rose from Jeffrey's chimney. The man was home. Thomas finished his route on autopilot, his mind racing. He delivered the remaining letters mechanically, his hands moving but his thoughts elsewhere. That evening, he sat in his small apartment and stared at the photograph again. Anna Harrington was alive. She had written Jeffrey Lies. What did Jeffrey lie about? And why was she sending letters to her own abandoned house? The date on the note was tomorrow. Something was going to happen. Thomas did not sleep well that night. The next morning, as Thomas sorted his mail, he heard a knock on the side door of the post office. He opened it to find Jeffrey Miller standing there, smiling warmly. Jeffrey was in his late 60s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He held a cup of coffee in one hand. He asked Thomas in a calm and friendly voice whether he had seen any strange letters lately, especially those addressed to the old Harrington place. He mentioned that someone kept leaving trash there, and he thought it might be mail. He said he was just curious. Thomas felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He forced himself to smile and replied that he had seen nothing strange, only the usual bills and flyers. Jeffrey nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. He said that was good and asked Thomas to let him know if he saw anything odd. He added that the house gave him bad feelings, especially after what happened to poor Anna. Then he shook his head sadly and walked away, sipping his coffee. Thomas closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Jeffrey had mentioned Anna. He had mentioned the letters. and he had lied about the trash. Thomas was sure of it now. Anna's message was clear: Jeffrey was not to be trusted. And the date on the note was today. Thomas looked at the clock. It was 8 in the morning. He had until midnight to figure out what the note meant. He decided to go back to the Harrington house after work, but this time, he would not just deliver a letter, he would go inside. Thomas finished his route earlier than usual that day. He told his supervisor he was feeling unwell, which was not entirely a lie. His stomach churned with a mixture of fear and determination. He walked toward Cliff Lane as the afternoon sun began to sink behind the harbor. The streets were nearly empty, and the only sounds were the cries of seagulls and the distant clank of fishing boats. When he reached the Harrington house, he paused. The building looked even more decrepit up close. Paint peeled from the wooden shutters, and the front steps were cracked and overgrown with weeds. The mail slot gaped like a dark mouth. Thomas glanced at Jeffrey's house. The curtains were drawn, but a light was on upstairs. He had to be careful. He walked around the side of the Harrington house, looking for another way in. A basement window was partially hidden by overgrown bushes. The glass was broken. Thomas pulled on a pair of work gloves from his bag and carefully removed the remaining shards. Then he slid through the narrow opening and dropped onto a dirt floor. The basement was dark and smelled of mold and decay. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and clicked it on. The beam revealed stone walls, rusted pipes, and a wooden staircase leading up to the main floor. But something else caught his attention. In the far corner, there was a door that did not look old. It was made of solid wood, with a heavy padlock. The padlock was new, shiny, and recently oiled. Thomas approached it slowly. He knelt down and examined the lock. It was not just any lock. It had a combination dial. He had no way to open it. But then he noticed a small gap between the door and the floor. He pressed his eye to the gap and shone the flashlight inside. He saw a room with a concrete floor, a wooden chair, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, and in the corner, a cot with a thin blanket. The room was exactly like the one in the photograph. Anna Harrington had been kept here, in the basement of her own abandoned house, but the room was empty now. Thomas sat back on his heels, his mind reeling. Anna had been imprisoned in her own home, right next to Jeffrey's house. How had no one noticed? The house was abandoned, yes, but someone had been coming and going. The letters were sent from somewhere else, not from the basement. Someone was mailing them, but who? And where was Anna now? Thomas stood up and tried the staircase. It creaked under his weight, but it held. He climbed to the main floor. The house was a wreck, broken furniture, shattered glass, graffiti on the walls, but he noticed a clear path through the debris, as if someone walked through regularly. The path led to the front door. He followed it and found a small table near the entrance. On the table was a stack of identical white envelopes, a pen, and a notebook. Thomas opened the notebook. The pages were filled with the same neat cursive he had seen on the letters. The first entry was dated over 2 years ago. It described how Anna was writing a letter to herself, hoping someone would find it. She wrote that Jeffrey had taken her and said she would never leave, but she would keep writing and sending letters because someone would come. Thomas flipped through the notebook. Anna had written hundreds of entries, each one more desperate than the last. She described how Jeffrey had lured her into his house one evening, claiming he had found a stray cat in her yard. When she stepped inside, he had knocked her unconscious. She woke up in the basement room. He had built that room years ago. During the renovation of his own house, he had extended his basement secretly, digging under the property line, so that the hidden room was technically on her land. No one knew it existed. He kept her there for 10 years. He fed her, gave her water, but never let her see the light of day. He told everyone she had run away. He even helped organize a search party, and all the while, she was less than 50 feet from her own front door. Then, 2 years ago, she found a way to write. Jeffrey had left a pen and paper by accident. She began writing letters, but she had no way to mail them. She discovered a loose floorboard in the basement that led to a narrow crawl space. That crawl space connected to the old coal chute of her own house. She could push letters up through the chute, and they would fall into her abandoned kitchen. But no one ever came. The house was locked. The letters piled up. Then one day, Thomas started delivering mail. The letters were swept out with the rubbish. But the new postman kept pushing envelopes through the slot. Anna realized that if she could get a letter into that mail slot, Thomas would deliver it. But the slot was on the outside of the house, and she was trapped inside the basement. She had to wait for Jeffrey to make a mistake. He did. One night, he left the basement door unlocked. She crept upstairs, found an old stamp in a mailbox, and mailed her first letter to herself. It worked. Thomas delivered it. She kept writing, kept mailing, hoping that someone would one day open a letter. Thomas closed the notebook, his hands shaking. The last entry was dated yesterday. It said that she had sent the photograph, that the postman was her only hope, and that if he did not come by tomorrow, she would try to escape. It added that Jeffrey had grown suspicious, had found the coal chute open, and knew someone had been inside the house. She wrote that she was hiding in the basement of Jeffrey's house now, in the original part, because he would not think to look there. She begged whoever read this to come to Jeffrey's basement because she was waiting. Thomas looked at the time. It was nearly 6 in the evening. He had to act now. He left the Harrington house and walked toward Jeffrey's property. His legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to move. He circled around to the back of Jeffrey's house, where a small storm cellar door lay flat on the ground. It was padlocked from the outside, but the lock was old and rusted. Thomas grabbed a heavy rock and smashed it. The lock broke with a loud crack. He pulled open the doors and descended a short flight of stairs into darkness. He clicked on his flashlight. The basement was cluttered with fishing gear and old boxes, and there, in the far corner, behind a stack of wooden crates, he saw a woman's hand reach out. It was Anna. She was thin, pale, and trembling, but her eyes were alive. She put a finger to her lips. Then they heard footsteps above. Jeffrey was home. Thomas froze. The footsteps moved across the floor above, slow and heavy. Jeffrey was walking from the kitchen to the living room. Then the footsteps stopped directly over the storm cellar. Anna pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide. Thomas killed his flashlight. The darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud and rapid. Then he heard Jeffrey speak, not loudly, almost to himself. Jeffrey said Anna's name and stated that he knew she was down there because the lock was broken. He said she had finally found a friend. His voice was calm, even gentle, which made it far more terrifying. Thomas felt Anna grab his arm. Her fingers were cold and bony. He reached into his pocket and felt his phone. There was no signal, of course, because the basement was underground. He had to think. Jeffrey continued, saying that he had seen the postman walking around his house. He mentioned Thomas by name, calling him a nice man who always delivered mail on time. He said he had wondered why Thomas was so interested in the Harrington place and admitted that he should have killed him weeks ago. But he wanted to see what Thomas would do. Now he knew. Thomas had come for Anna. There was a long pause. Then Jeffrey announced that he was coming down. Thomas heard the storm cellar door creak open. A shaft of gray light cut through the darkness, and Jeffrey's silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs. He was holding something in his hand. Thomas could not tell if it was a flashlight or a knife. He pulled Anna behind a stack of old tires and pressed himself flat against the wall. Jeffrey descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. He clicked on his own flashlight and swept the beam across the basement. The light danced over fishing nets, rusted tools, and empty paint cans. Jeffrey called out to Anna softly, telling her to come out. He claimed he would not hurt her and never had. He said he just wanted her to stay because she was beautiful and never looked at him. He mentioned that for all those years next door, she never once invited him for coffee, so he made her stay. He said it was easy, and then his voice cracked with a strange mix of anger and sorrow as he called her an ungrateful woman. Thomas felt a surge of rage, but he forced himself to stay still. He had no weapon. He was a postman, not a fighter, but he had the element of surprise. Jeffrey's flashlight beam moved closer. It swept over the tires. Anna held her breath. The beam passed over them, then stopped. It moved back. Jeffrey had seen something. He whispered that there she was and stepped forward. Thomas saw the glint of a knife in Jeffrey's other hand. At that moment, Thomas lunged. He threw himself at Jeffrey's legs, tackling him hard. Jeffrey fell backward, hitting his head on a concrete pillar. The knife clattered away. The flashlight spun across the floor, casting wild shadows. Jeffrey groaned and tried to get up, but Thomas was already on top of him, pinning his arms. Thomas shouted for Anna to run and call the police. Anna scrambled up the stairs, her bare feet slapping on the wood. She disappeared through the storm cellar door. Jeffrey snarled and twisted violently, throwing Thomas off. Thomas hit the floor hard, his shoulder cracking against the stone. Jeffrey crawled toward the knife. Thomas saw it lying near an old barrel and kicked out, sending the knife skidding into the darkness. Jeffrey screamed in frustration. He turned and grabbed a heavy wrench from a shelf. He raised it above his head. Thomas rolled to the side just as the wrench came down, smashing the concrete floor where his head had been. Splinters of rock flew into his face. He scrambled backward, his hands finding an old fishing gaff, a long hook used to land large fish. He swung it wildly. The hook caught Jeffrey's arm, tearing through his jacket and into his flesh. Jeffrey howled and dropped the wrench. He stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm. Then he turned and ran up the stairs. Thomas heard the storm cellar door slam shut. A moment later, he heard a padlock click into place. Jeffrey had locked them both inside. Thomas rushed up the stairs and pushed against the door. It did not budge. He kicked it, but the wood was thick and the lock was new. He was trapped. Below, in the darkness, he heard Jeffrey's voice through the door, muffled but clear. Jeffrey said that Thomas should have minded his own business and that now they would both stay. He added that Anna would come back because she always did, as she had nowhere else to go. Then footsteps walked away. Thomas slumped against the door, breathing hard. He had failed. Anna was free, but she was outside, and he was locked in. Would she find help? The town was small. Everyone knew Jeffrey. Everyone liked him. Would they believe a half-starved woman who had been missing for 10 years? Or would they think she was crazy? Thomas had no answers. He sat in the darkness for what felt like hours. His shoulder throbbed. His hands were cut and bleeding. He thought about his quiet life, his mail route, his small apartment. He had never wanted to be a hero. He had only wanted to deliver letters, and now he might die for that curiosity. But then he heard a sound. It was faint at first, then louder. Sirens, police sirens, growing closer. Thomas's heart leaped. He pounded on the storm cellar door and yelled that he was inside, begging for help. The sirens stopped outside. He heard shouting, then the sound of heavy boots on gravel. A voice called out, identifying itself as police and ordering the door to be opened. Then the padlock was shot off, and the door flew open. Bright lights blinded Thomas. Hands pulled him up the stairs. He saw Anna standing behind a row of police officers, wrapped in a blanket, pointing at him. She said that he had saved her. Thomas the postman. Jeffrey was on his knees in the front yard, his hands cuffed behind his back. He was staring at the ground, silent. An officer helped Thomas to a waiting ambulance. As they bandaged his shoulder, he watched them lead Jeffrey away. The old fisherman did not look back. The trial took place 6 months later. Jeffrey Miller was convicted of kidnapping and false imprisonment. The hidden room in the basement was discovered, and the letters that Anna had written became evidence. Thomas testified, his voice calm and clear. He told the court about the envelopes, the photograph, and the note that read Jeffrey lies. Anna herself took the stand, and for the first time in 10 years, she spoke publicly about her ordeal. The courtroom was silent as she described the years of darkness, but she also spoke of hope. She spoke of the postman who had opened a letter that was never meant for him. Jeffrey was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Anna moved to a different town, far from the sea. She wrote Thomas a letter every month for a year. He kept everyone. Thomas continued to deliver mail on his old route. Every Tuesday, he passed the Harrington house. The house was eventually torn down, and the lot became a small park. A bench was placed there, with a plaque that read, "For those who wait for a letter that never comes, and for those who deliver it anyway." Thomas would sometimes sit on that bench during his lunch break. He would watch the seagulls circle the harbor and think about how a single envelope had changed his life. He never opened another person's mail again. He did not need to. He had already found the only message that mattered, that in a world of silence, one voice, written in neat cursive on plain white paper, can still be heard, and that is where the story ends.